So as many people probably know, last year the CDC the CDC mandated, or a federal moratorium, or whatever you want to call it, an eviction ban, because they did it in order to slow the spread of coronavirus. Now, that ban was set to expire, and did expire a few days ago. I think it was July 31st it was set to expire, or something like that. And the federal government was fully ready to just let that lapse, and 15 million, let that number sink in, 15 million people were on the verge of being kicked out of their home or apartment onto the street. Imagine what that looks like when you have 15 million people unhoused, homeless. 15 million homeless people in the country. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of jobs that would eventually be lost. Okay, that's a lot of revenue for cities and states and the federal government tax revenue to be lost. Okay, that's a big deal. And the federal government was just okay with that. They were just ready to let it go. And the whole thing about it that really pisses me off is we knew months ago when this was set to expire. And the federal government didn't do a fucking thing to even think about, hey, maybe we should do something about the 15 million people who are potentially going to be unhoused. So I reached out to all of the representatives in my area, and at the time of recording this, none of them have responded. So my question to them was, I asked if they were willing, because remember, Congress is set to go on vacation very soon. So I asked if they are willing to forego their vacation and do something legislatively regarding the eviction crisis. It is sad. The sad part is members of Congress on both sides of the aisle don't want to extend the eviction crisis because they take money, in my view. The big reason for this is because a lot of them take money from private equity and real estate companies. For example, the politicians that I reached out to who represent my area of the world, I live in Ohio, and I live around the 9th, 5th, and 4th congressional districts of Ohio, Northwest Ohio. I personally live in Wood County, but I reached out to the Wood County, Lucas County, Erie County, and both senators for the state. None of them got back to me as of yet. And the funny thing is, Senator Rob Portman, he takes money for his campaign from BlackRock, one of the largest private equity companies in America, and they are buying up houses faster and at a higher price than average citizens, forcing them to be renters forever. He also takes money from GBX Group, which is another private real estate company. Representative Marcy Kaptur, who represents Toledo, parts of Lucas and Erie County, takes money from Forest City. They're a commercial and residential real estate management company. And then Representative Bob Latta, who is the 5th Congressional District, who represents all of Wood County and some more counties to the northwest. Jim Jordan, who's also a representative in the 4th Congressional District. They, along with Marcy Kaptur, all three take money from the National Association of Realtors. So the truth is, our federal government didn't want to extend the eviction moratorium because they were getting pressed by their multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar donor group to say, hey, we need this money. The BlackRocks of the world, they don't need the money right away. So don't extend the ban. And to even further my point, Lee Fang at The Intercept is out with a new piece about how he intercepted some phone calls from corporate landlords and Wall Street scumbags chomping at the bit to get people evicted. The phone calls were between corporate landlords and bankers trying to figure out how to get people out of their apartments and homes. It just goes back to the segment I did a couple of weeks ago, highlighting the piece that David Sirota had in the Daily Poster about how large private equity companies like BlackRock and others are buying apartment complexes and building homes to force Americans to rent forever. Now they are doing everything they can to lobby Congress and have, these calls with these corporate executives to get around or stop altogether the eviction moratorium, right? The only reason why the eviction moratorium has been extended until sometime in October, 60 days, was because Cori Bush, representative from St. Louis, Missouri, and other members of the squad. It started with Cori Bush, and then other members as it came about of Congress and the squad camped out on the Capitol steps until the CDC and the Biden administration extended the moratorium. Now, here's the gray area. Back in June, the Supreme Court came out with a ruling that said, we will extend the eviction moratorium, okay? But when it expires, Congress has to do something. We can't just have the CDC and the executive branch, this time it being Joe Biden, dictate United States housing law. Congress, the legislative branch, has to act in order to do something about the eviction moratorium or the eviction ban or the eviction crisis, because people have been locked out of their jobs for so long, they're back on their rent, they can't afford to pay it. Congress has to do something, but they didn't. Okay, so the CDC is prohibiting evictions through October 3rd, and the only reason they are allowed to get around the Supreme Court ruling is because they're doubling down on the Delta variant. Now, back when the eviction moratorium was first set in place, it was in order to stop the spread of COVID, because when we have hundreds of thousands or millions of people unhomed or homeless, they are congregating together or they don't have shelter, this and that. And the spread of coronavirus, is lifted up, right? So according to I already said that. According to the Aspen Institute, they estimate as many as 15 million Americans across 6.5 million households were facing eviction. Now, the worst part about all this is Congress had already appropriated $45 billion in aid for those who face eviction. $25 billion in December and another $21.5 billion in March. Now, that's a lot of money. Why are we still facing this crisis? Well, only $3 billion of that 45 has gone out. Okay? And the problem is Congress or the federal government, however you want to blame, they gave that money, they appropriated this money, and they're letting the states and the local governments handle it. In my view, that is the wrong way to go about it. It's a very irresponsible way to go about it, because when you have these small rural areas or these poor urban areas that have high COVID cases right now, the governments and the local governments of those states and of those districts don't have the manpower or the resources to effectively allocate that money to those who need it, right? Do you know who does have the resources? The federal government, the IRS. The federal government knows how much money you make a year. They know everything about you already. So why can't they distribute this money? They did it in the past with the $1,200 and then $600 stimulus checks. Why couldn't they do it again to the people who were facing eviction? Okay? They could have. They chose not to. That's the issue here. They have $45 billion ready to go, and they're making a choice not to do something. That's why Cori Bush and other members of the squad camped out to gin up public outrage and public pressure in order for now Joe Biden to tell the CDC, all right, extend it because people are pissed off. They were ready to not extend it. Congress left town, okay? They left. The Senate was busy working on the bullshit bipartisan infrastructure plan, which we'll get to later. But the House, they were done. They went home. They're on vacation, except for Cori Bush and a couple other members of the squad. They said, no, you know what? We're going to camp on the steps of the Capitol until people give a shit. And what happened? People gave a shit. And this is the first time. This is the first time that the squad, in my view, actually did something. Because they could have done so much more to block other bills last year, the year before, this current year with the rescue plan. They could have, but they didn't. They followed suit. They went for the status quo. And to be fair to you, I was kind of disappointed in all of them. But here, they actually made a difference, right? And when Congress goes on vacation in mid-August, when they get back from vacation on October 3rd, the eviction moratorium is going to expire, and they're going to have to do something. The Supreme Court is not going to allow the CDC to extend the eviction moratorium, or the federal government, or not the federal government, or Joe Biden to extend the eviction moratorium. And I agree with that, because we can't have CDC bureaucrats, unelected bureaucrats who have been in government their entire life, to dictate housing law. We elect Congress people, men and women, to represent our districts. We elect them to write and make law. Okay? And they are the ones with the power to write housing law and get it passed through Congress. Okay? They have the power to do it, but they didn't. They left fucking town. And you got to think what 15 million Americans being homeless looks like. We have children. We have people who lose their house, their apartment, and then all of a sudden they don't have a place to stay at night. Then they start missing days of work. Then they get fired from work. Now they don't have an income. Then they lose access to financial systems. And once you're out of the system, it is extremely difficult to get back into the system. Because if you're out of the system and you don't have an address, you can't sign up for federal aid or welfare or food stamps. Okay? Then once you lose your ID because you don't have a house, all your belongings are in a bag or your car, and then you don't have enough money to get gas because you lost your job. Now you're walking everywhere and you're losing stuff. You don't have an ID. Nobody can identify you to get you the help that you need. Once you lose your home, it's over. You're done. There's nothing left. Maybe you can still keep a job, but once you lose your home, you start missing sleep, you start slacking behind, maybe you get addicted to drugs, or you get, you fall into a depression, you stop going to work, you stop getting paid, your bank account gets ultimately closed because you're out of money. Now what? You're screwed, and it's Congress's fault. The CDC should not, in any way, shape, or form, dictate housing law in America, okay? And I understand the bigger problem here, right? Because once the eviction moratorium is over, and if and when Congress figures out what to do about it, we still have the issue of all of these landlords, because let's face it, a big portion of landlords in America aren't, the big, commercial conglomerates, the BlackRocks, right? They're not. They're private, middle class, small town landlords. And if someone is behind on their rent for, 6 or 8 months, and now the moratorium is over, and they can't afford to pay the landlord, well, the landlord still has to pay the bank on that mortgage. So they either have to declare bankruptcy, they default on their mortgage, they have to refinance, or worst case scenario, we have to bail out the banks again. I just think Congress should have done something a lot sooner than when they did. And we're going to see in October what happens with the moratorium. Because even if they extend it again till the end of the year, which some Congress people are advocating for, like Ro Khanna, for example, he advocated for extending the moratorium for the end of the year. Okay, let's say they do that. Then what? 2022 comes around, it's midterm season, Congress is more focused on getting reelected than they are helping the people. And what happens? We have a bunch of people who are back on their rent, the moratorium's over. Small-time landlords can't afford to just say, yeah, that's fine, don't pay me for 8 months. No, they got to pay the bank. They got to pay their mortgage. So what are we going to do? We're going to bail out the banks again? And we're going to get our shit together, and we're going to appropriate that $45 billion and get it to tenants and get it to landlords, like we should have done from the federal level months ago.